Chapter 1. The Sinking Stranger. The sun sagged low over the wide prairie, its light bleeding gold across the horizon and painting long shadows across the land. Dust rode the evening breeze, carried with the faint cry of a coyote somewhere out past the rocky bluffs. Eleanor Hayes tightened her shawl around her shoulders as she trudged along the edge of Dry Creek. The summer had baked the earth into cracks and gullies, but here the ground still held the strange, treacherous patches of soft earth no rancher trusted. It was a sound that stopped her cold, not the cry of a bird or the skitter of a lizard. A man's voice, low, guttural, desperate. "Help! Someone help me!" Ellie's heart hammered as she peered across the flats. At first she saw nothing, only the shimmer of heat rising off the sand. Then movement, an arm flailing, sinking with each frantic push. A man's broad frame half swallowed by the earth, thrashing in a pool of treacherous quicksand. She didn't think, didn't weigh the danger. She hitched her skirts and sprinted across the brittle grass, boots crunching dry soil until the sound turned wet, sucking, ominous. "Hold still," she called, breath ragged. The cowboy's head slipped down over one eye, his face streaked with sweat and grit. His chest heaved with panic. He was larger than most men she knew, his belly and shoulders thick, giving the impression of someone used to hard labor but mocked by the world for carrying too much of it. His eyes, though, were sharp and wide with terror. "If I hold still, I'll drown quicker," he rasped. His voice broke like the crack of a whip. Ellie's gaze snapped to the rope slung across her saddle, a few feet back where she'd tied her mare. She ran for it, cursing under her breath, and yanked it free. By the time she returned, the man had sunk nearly to his ribs. "Don't you quit on me now," she muttered, looping the rope into a lasso. She cast it, the coil whistling through the hot evening air before landing across his chest. "Wrap it under your arms." His trembling hands fumbled but obeyed, dragging the line beneath his shoulders. Ellie braced her boots in the dirt, planted her weight, and heaved with everything she had. The rope groaned. The man bellowed as the muck resisted, clinging like a jealous lover. "Again!" She gritted her teeth, pulling, her palms burning raw. Her mare nickered nervously, tossing her head at the struggle. With a savage grunt, Ellie gave one last haul, leaning her whole body into it. The cowboy lurched free, collapsing onto firmer ground like a fish hauled from water, chest heaving, mud smeared across his shirt and beard. For a moment, neither spoke, only the sound of his ragged breathing and the faint creak of crickets filling the dusk. Ellie dropped to her knees, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're a damn fool riding this stretch alone." The man tilted his head back, eyes closed as if savoring the solid ground beneath him. Then with a wheezy chuckle he answered, "A damn fool who owes you his hide." His voice carried gratitude beneath the rasp. She studied him, the soft roundness of his middle beneath a mud-slick vest, the strength hidden in his thick arms, the exhaustion shadowing his face. And yet there was something else in his eyes when he looked at her, something that made her pulse trip. "Name's Benjamin Cole," he said at last, dragging himself upright with an awkward dignity. He tipped his ruined hat in her direction. "You've saved me from a grave no man should meet. Reckon I owe you my life." Ellie stood, brushing dust from her skirts. The prairie wind tugged her hair loose as the sky burned with the last red fire of sunset. She looked him square in the eyes, her breath still uneven. "You don't owe me," she replied. "Just try not to go sinking again. Next time, I might not be around." For a heartbeat, they stood there, two strangers, dust swirling between them, the world holding its breath. Somewhere far off, the faint sound of saloon piano drifted on the wind, carried from town. Benjamin smiled faintly, though his hand still trembled. "Then I reckon fate's on my side. 'Cause I never figured an angel would be riding these parts." Ellie felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she turned sharply toward her horse to hide it. "Come on," she said, tossing the reins. "You're in no shape to walk. My ranch ain't far. We'll clean you up before nightfall." The cowboy hesitated, mud dripping from his boots, but the look in his eyes was steady now, trusting, grateful, as he swung into the saddle with a grunt. Ellie led the way across the prairie, the sun dipping lower, the coyotes beginning their mournful chorus. The dust swallowed their tracks behind them, as if the earth itself meant to keep this meeting a secret for now. Chapter 2, A Cowboy with Shadows. The night had settled heavy by the time Ellie reached her ranch. Her lantern bobbed in the darkness, casting long shadows over the weather-worn boards of the porch and corral where her cattle rustled uneasily. She pushed open the front door, its hinges groaning like some old ghost, and led Benjamin inside. The cowboy lowered himself onto a chair by the fire with a grunt, his frame too broad for the worn wooden seat. Mud streaked his shirt and clung to his boots, but his eyes, clear and steady now, followed her every move as she stoked the flames higher. The warmth filled the room, carrying the crackle of burning mesquite. Ellie ladled stew into a tin bowl, sliding it across the table toward him. "Eat. You look like you ain't seen food in days." Benjamin gave a sheepish chuckle, spooning hungrily before she even sat down. 3 days riding hard, miss. Dry biscuits and jerky don't do much for a man my size." Ellie arched an eyebrow, lips twitching in the faintest smile. "That explains the Quicksand trouble. Prairie don't take kindly to heavy boots tromping over its weak spots." His hand paused halfway to his mouth. For a heartbeat, shame flickered across his face. Then, with surprising honesty, he muttered, "Ain't the first time folks made sport of me for being too heavy for my own good." He forced a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. Guess the prairie just joined the chorus. The words hit her harder than she expected. She set her spoon down, studying him through the glow of the fire. His shoulders were slumped, as though years of ridicule pressed on him heavier than any saddle. And yet, beneath it, she could sense the iron of a man who had weathered worse storms and mockery. "Prairie don't sing, Mr. Cole," Ellie said softly. "It swallows men whole, no matter their size. Only difference is you had luck on your side tonight." He met her gaze, something raw flashing in his eyes. Then he cleared his throat, changing the subject. "You live out here alone?" "Nearest neighbor's a good half-day ride." Ellie's jaw tightened. "Since Pa passed, it's just me. The land's all I've got." She busied herself with wiping down the counter, but her shoulders were stiff. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Takes grit to hold on to land when men are circling like buzzards. I saw riders out by the creek before you found me. They weren't watching me. They were watching you." Her hand froze on the rag. Slowly, she turned, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" He set his spoon down carefully, his tone suddenly grave. "There's talk in every saloon from here to Laramie. Land barons buying up territory, paying ranchers to leave, or running 'em out when they won't. Woman alone with a spread like this." He shook his head. "You're a target, Miss Hayes." Ellie forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle in her throat. "I've heard rumors. Men talk big after whiskey." Benjamin's gaze stayed steady. "This ain't just whiskey talk. I know their kind. You don't scare easy, but you can't outshoot a dozen men riding down on you." The room went quiet, only the fire popping in the hearth. Ellie turned back to the counter, shoulders squared, though her pulse thudded in her ears. She'd fought off rustlers before, but Benjamin's words carried the weight of certainty. After a long silence, she said, "Why warn me? You don't owe me anything. Could have just ridden on once you got your strength back." Benjamin hesitated, then pushed himself up, walking to window. He stared out at the vast, dark prairie, moonlight spilling silver over the grass. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant, 'cause he looked at me like I was a man worth savon, not just some fat fool too clumsy to keep his boots dry. He exhaled slowly, shoulders tight. Ain't many ever bothered to see more than the size of me. Ellie stood still, words caught in her throat. His honesty stripped the room bare of pretense. For a moment, the only sound was the lonely cry of a coyote rolling in from the hills. She finally spoke, her voice softer than she intended. Maybe I saw more because you showed me more. Benjamin turned from the window, the firelight catching the weariness etched in his face. Yet his eyes, dark, wounded, stubborn, met hers with a flicker of gratitude. "Reckon I'm in your debt," he murmured. Ellie's lips curved, though the shadow of unease still lingered. "Then pay me back by eating more stew. Tomorrow will bring its own trouble, no doubt." Benjamin chuckled, settling back at the table, though the weight of danger hung between them like smoke. Ellie moved to the hearth, poking at the flames, her eyes stealing once, just once, toward the stranger she'd pulled from the earth. Outside, the wind whispered through the dry grass. Somewhere out in the darkness, hooves drummed faintly, then faded. They weren't just passing by. They were watching. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Saloon. The morning sun spilled over the prairie in molten gold, painting Ellie's ranch in sharp light and long shadows. Dust lifted under Benjamin's boots as he tightened the girth on his saddle. His horse, a rangy bay with a white blaze, tossed his head impatiently. Ellie stood on the porch, arms crossed against her chest. She didn't like the look in his eyes, steady, determined, but hiding something unspoken. "You sure you're strong enough to ride?" she asked. Benjamin tugged the cinch strap one last time and straightened, tipping his hat low against the glare. "I've been through worse. Need to see what kind of trouble's stirring in town before it rides out this way." "You mean before it rides straight into me?" Ellie said flatly. He gave her a half-smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've got grit, Miss Hayes, but grit won't stand alone against men with pockets deep enough to buy bullets by the barrel." She hated to admit he was right. Still, as she watched him mount, she fought the uneasy tightening in her chest. He was a stranger. Why did it matter to her if he never rode back? The saloon in Deadwood Crossing was already alive by the time Benjamin pushed through its bat-wing doors. The piano's jaunty notes clashed against a low drone of voices, while cigar smoke curled toward the rafters like ghostly fingers. Floorboards creaked beneath boots and spurs, the air heavy with whiskey and sweat. He stepped inside, shoulders squaring despite the familiar sting of eyes on him. Men at the bar glanced his way, then looked back with smirks half hidden by their glasses. "Cole," someone drawled from a card table. "Didn't think the floor'd hold you." Laughter rippled, sharp as broken glass. Benjamin ignored it, heading for the bar. "Whiskey," he said, his voice low, steady. The barkeep poured without a word, sliding the glass down the polished wood. As Benjamin lifted it, he caught whispers drifting from the far end of the room. He didn't need to strain to hear. His name wasn't spoken, but Ellie's was. "Hayes girl sitting on land worth twice what she knows," one man muttered. "Baron Pierce won't let it go much longer. Word is she's got no kin left. Easy pickings." Benjamin's jaw tightened. He set his glass down with a deliberate clink. At that moment, Ellie slipped in through the doors. She'd followed him after all, her shawl drawn close as though it might shield her from the thick eyes and laughter that followed her across the room. She caught sight of Benjamin, relief flashing across her face, then masked it quickly. The whispers grew bolder now that she stood there, men talking as if she couldn't hear, their voices carrying over the piano. "Pretty thing, all alone on that spread. Shame when it goes up in flames." Benjamin turned, his boot heels biting the floor as he crossed to their table. He stood tall, casting his shadow over the men as silence pressed down on the room. "You boys got a funny way of talking about a lady," he said, voice quiet but dangerous, like thunder rumbling on the horizon. The larger the two sneered up at him. "We were just making conversation. Don't reckon it's your business." Benjamin leaned in, resting one hand on the table. His broad shoulders blocked the lamplight, his eyes dark beneath the brim of his hat. "Then reckon again. 'Cause any man talks that way about Miss Hayes is talking through me first." The tension snapped taut. The piano faltered, then stopped altogether. Every gaze in the saloon fixed on him. The man shifted, hand hovering near the butt of his revolver. "Careful, Cole. You're built broad enough to make a fine coffin." Benjamin didn't flinch. He straightened slowly, letting his coat fall back just enough to show the revolver at his hip. "I'll take the coffin. Question is, who wants to fill it?" The silence broke with the barkeep's sharp voice. "No shooting in here. Take it outside if you got the itch." The card players muttered. The piano stumbled back into a tune, and the air loosened, but only slightly. The men at the table backed down, their sneers curling into sullen silence. Benjamin turned and found Ellie watching him, wide-eyed, the lamplight glinting in her hair. She hadn't expected him to stand for her, especially not here, where ridicule clung to him like burrs. Yet in that moment, he looked every bit the man she doubted he could be. Steady, unyielding, more than the world's cruel words about his size. She crossed the room, voice low as she reached his side. "You didn't have to do that." He tipped his hat slightly, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe I did." Ellie looked away, heart pounding faster than she wanted to admit. For the first time, the danger felt real, and so did the pull between them. Chapter 4. Hearts Beneath the Dust. The prairie sun had burned high and hard all afternoon, leaving the land baked and the horizon blurred by heat waves. By the time Ellie and Benjamin rode back from Deadwood Crossing, the air smelled of dry sagebrush and dust. Her ranch stretched out before them, fences sagging, cattle restless, the earth cracked and thirsty. Ellie dismounted first, boots crunching on the parched ground. She moved to the corral without a word, but Benjamin saw the stiffness in her shoulders. The whispers in the saloon had gotten under her skin. He followed, looping his reins over a post. "You keep this place up by yourself?" he asked, rolling his sleeves past his elbows. Ellie nodded, lifting a hammer to the fence rail. "Pa raised me to mend what's broke. Don't take a man for that." Benjamin picked up a post beside her, bracing it into the earth with a grunt. His size, the very thing men mocked, now seemed an advantage. He handled it with like kindling. Sweat darkened his shirt, streaking through the dust on his skin. "I ain't saying you need a man," he said after a moment. "Just saying it's hell of a load to carry alone." Ellie drove a nail home with one sharp swing, her jaw tight. "I've been alone long enough to know what I can carry." For a while they worked in silence, only the hammer's rhythm and the restless ball of cattle filling the air. Dust clung to their clothes, the scent of sweat and what heavy between them. Slowly, the edge of their words gave way to something quieter, steadier. When they paused for water at the trough, Benjamin leaned against the rail, watching the sky. The sunset was beginning to smear orange and crimson across the west. "You saved me, Ellie," he said finally, his voice rougher than before. "Not just from that mud pit. From being nothing but the fool everyone laughs at." He turned his head toward her, eyes catching the last of the light. "You looked at me like a man worth something." Her throat tightened. She hadn't meant to let him see her heart soften, but there it was, written plain in his gaze. She shifted, dipping her hands in the cool water, letting the silence stretch. "You talk like the world's already decided who you are," she murmured. "But it hasn't. Not to me." Benjamin's chest rose slowly, as if the words eased a weight he'd carried too long. He pushed away from the rail, moving closer until the warmth of his presence wrapped around her. "Then I'll tell you plain," he said, voice low, steady. "Those men in town, they'll come here. Maybe tomorrow, maybe a week from now. They won't quit till they've got your land, or your life. I swore, when you pulled me out of that quicksand, I'd pay you back. I aim to keep that promise." Ellie turned sharply, her eyes flashing. "Why? Why risk yourself for me?" For a moment, Benjamin only looked at her, the dusk settling in the lines of his face. Then he said with no hesitation, "Because you gave me back more than breath. You gave me back my dignity. And I won't stand by while they take what's yours." Her lips parted, but no words came. The fire in his tone stirred something deep in her chest, something both frightening and unshakably safe. A gunshot cracked in the distance, sharp against the evening stillness. Both of them froze. Ellie's cattle scattered, bellowing in panic. Benjamin's hand went to his revolver, eyes narrowing at the ridgeline beyond the pasture. "Warning shot," he muttered. "They're circling, letting you know they're coming." Ellie swallowed hard, but her voice came out firm. "Then let him come. I've fought rustlers before." Benjamin turned to her, the fading light carving steel in his features. "Not like these. You need more than grit and a rifle. You need men who'll stand with you." She held his gaze, torn between pride and fear. He reached for her hand, callous fingers brushing against her palm, grounding her. "I'll ride for help," he promised. "I'll bring back men you can trust. But you have to believe me, I will come back." Her hand trembled in his, though her voice stayed steady. "Men leave, Benjamin. That's what they do." He squeezed once firm. "Not this time." The wind rose, carrying the dry scent of sage and the mournful cry of coyotes waking on the far hills. In that moment, with the shadows of night stretching long over the ranch, Ellie didn't know which scared her more, the men riding toward her land, or the thought of believing in Benjamin Cole. Chapter 5. Alone Against the Storm. The days crawled by, each hour stretching longer than the one before. Ellie woke with the sunrise and worked until her hands bled, fixing fences, checking her herd, stacking firewood by the porch. Anything to keep her mind from circling the same question: had Benjamin truly meant to come back? By the second day, the ranch felt emptier than it ever had before. Every creak of the barn boards, every gust of wind rattling the shutters, sounded like a warning. Her mare pawed nervously in the corral, ears pricked toward the horizon as though she sensed riders long before they came. Ellie sat on the porch one evening, her Winchester across her knees. The sky bled red at the edges. The prairie turned to shadow as the sun slid down. Coyotes howled in the distance, their mournful chorus rising and falling with the wind. She cleaned the rifle slowly, her fingers steady though her stomach churned. "Fool girl," she muttered under her breath. "Trusting a man you pulled from the mud." Still, she couldn't scrub away the sound of Benjamin's promise. Not this time. It clung to her like the scent of sage after rain, impossible to forget. That night, she startled awake to the crack of a gunshot echoing across the plains. She bolted upright, grabbing her rifle, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. The cattle bawled in the darkness, hoofs thundering as they pressed against the fence. Ellie dashed barefoot onto the porch, lantern light cutting a small circle against the night. Out there, beyond the corral, she caught the faint glint of riders' silhouettes cresting a distant rise. They didn't come closer, not yet, just watching, taunting. Her hands tightened around the rifle until her knuckles turned white. She raised the barrel, aimed steady, and fired into the air. The crack split the night, scattering the coyotes into silence. The riders turned, their shadows fading back into darkness like wolves slinking out of sight. She stayed there long after they had gone, chest heaving, the taste of iron fierce sharp on her tongue. When she finally lowered the gun, her arms trembled. By dawn, Ellie had decided she wouldn't sit idle. She saddled her mare, riding the property line, her eyes scanning for movement. She set traps near the barn doors, sharpened her knives, and stacked extra cartridges on the kitchen table. Each task steadied her hands, but her heart still carried a weight heavier than any rifle. That evening, she lit the lamp early, the flicker throwing long shadows against the walls. She pulled Pa's old Bible from the shelf, thumbed the worn leather cover, then set aside unopened. Faith was a fragile thing these days. The wind picked up, whistling through the cracks of the shutters. Dust swirled across the yard, and the air tasted dry and metallic, like a storm was near, though the sky stayed clear. Ellie stood in the doorway, rifle in her hands, watching the horizon turn gold, then purple, then black. The loneliness pressed hardest at dusk. Her shoulders ached from carrying it, but she refused to bend. If Benjamin never returned, she'd stand alone. Better to die with her boots on than yield to men who thought they could take what was hers. Still, as she listened to the night settle heavy over the plains, her lips formed a whisper she would never admit aloud. Benjamin, don't you dare break your word. The storm wasn't weather. It was a shadow of hooves gathering in the dark, waiting. And Ellie Hayes stood at the center of it, alone with her rifle, the only heartbeat echoing in a house that suddenly felt far too big. Chapter 6. The Thundering Return. The third evening fell heavy and restless. The prairie stretched wide and empty, but Ellie felt eyes on her with every step she took. The cattle pressed tight along the fence, tails swishing nervously, their low moans blending with the steady whistle of the wind. She stood in the barn doorway, rifle balanced across her arms, staring into the horizon. The sky burned with the last of the day, streaked with crimson and violet, like the world itself had been wounded. Her breath was shallow, her chest tight. 3 days, and still no sign of Benjamin Cole. Ellie's jaw clenched as she scanned the distance. Far off, a dust cloud rose against the dying sun. At first she thought it was storm wind dragging dirt from the flats, but then her heart jolted. She heard it, a low, steady rumble, rolling like distant thunder. Hooves. She stepped forward, the rifle trembling just slightly in her grip. At first, her mind twisted with dread. They've come. The Baron's men, a whole army of them, riding to finish me tonight. The rumble grew louder, stronger, until the very earth beneath her boots seemed to shake. Shadows of riders appeared against the blood-red sky, a long line cresting the ridge. Ellie's knees nearly buckled when she saw him. Benjamin, broad frame steady in the saddle, hat pulled low, dust fly behind him like a storm cloud. But he wasn't alone. He led a sea of men, riders shoulder to shoulder, rifles gleaming, their shouts rolling across the prairie like a battle cry. 100 strong. Her heart slammed in her chest. The Baron's watchers, hidden out in the scrub, scattered like startled coyotes. Ellie saw them spur their horses hard, retreating as the thunder hooves closed in. Benjamin raised his arm high, and the men behind him answered with a roar that shook the air. Dust billowed, choking and golden in the sunset, but through it she saw him, solid, unyielding, and not the man she had feared might abandon her. Ellie lowered her rifle slowly, breath rushing from her chest as if she'd been holding it for days. Benjamin broke from the line, spurring his horse toward her yard, his coat flare behind him, his eyes fixed only on her. He drew up hard at the gate, swinging down with surprising grace for a man his size. His boots hit the dirt, and he strode toward her through the dust. "I told you," he said, voice rough from the ride, eyes burning with something fierce. "I'd come back." Ellie couldn't speak for a long moment. Her throat ached with everything she'd held back. Fear, loneliness, the stubborn pride that had kept her standing alone with a rifle these past nights. Finally, her voice broke through, low and unsteady. You brought an army?" Benjamin's mouth curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes stayed locked on hers. "Didn't figure you deserved anything less." Around them, the riders fanned out, dust rising in golden clouds as they reined their mounts, forming a wall of steel and grit between her ranch and the darkness creeping in from the hills. Ellie's chest swelled, her fear burning away into something fierce and hot, a spark that felt dangerously close to hope. She searched his face, mud-streaked, weary but resolute, and for the first time since Pa died, she felt she wasn't carrying the whole world alone. The earth still trembled from the echo of hooves, the last light of the sunset, catching the barrels of rifles and the grit in their faces. And in the center of it all, Benjamin Cole stood like a storm she hadn't seen coming, a man no longer sinking, no longer mocked. A man returned with thunder at his back. Chapter 7, Gunfire and Glory. The prairie didn't stay quiet for long. Not an hour after Benjamin's men fanned out across the Hayes Ranch, a second dust cloud rose in the east. Ellie stood on the porch with her rifle clutched tight, her stomach sinking as torchlight flickered against the darkening horizon. "They're coming," Benjamin said beside her, voice steady but low. Dozens of riders poured out of the hills, the barons hired guns, their whoops splitting the night. Firelight danced across their pistols and rifles, their silhouettes black against the blood-orange moonrise. Ellie swallowed hard. Looks like the buzzards finally came to feast. Benjamin's eyes narrowed, the lamplight catching the hard edge of his jaw. "Then we'll show M this land's not there's a pick clean." He turned, his voice booming across the yard. "Men, hold the line." The cowboys he brought answered with a cheer, rifles lifted, the sound rolling like thunder through corral. Horses stamped, the ground trembling beneath the weight of what was coming. The first shots rang out sharp and hot. Bullets split the night, sparking against fence rails, kicking up dirt. Ellie ducked behind a trough, heart hammering as splinters showered her hair. She steadied her rifle, squeezed the trigger, and felt the recoil thump her shoulder. A rider tumbled from his saddle, hitting the dust hard. "Good shot," Benjamin bellowed, firing from beside her. His revolver barked flames, each crack precise, measured. The ranch became chaos, gun smoke thick as fog, the cries of men and horses mixing with the crack of gunfire. Torches hurled into the dry grass lit the night with patches of fire, their orange glow dancing across Ellie's pale, determined face. Through the haze, she caught glimpses of Benjamin. He moved like a boulder in a storm, unyielding, commanding. He hauled one of his men to his feet after a hit, fired over his shoulder, then shoved the fellow back into cover. Despite his size, he stood tall where others crouched, his presence like an anchor against the tide. Ellie fired again, lips pressed in. Sweat trickled down her temple, and her arms trembled, but she never lowered her aim. When a rider broke the line and charged toward the porch, she spun, rifle raised, only for Benjamin to step in front of her, revolver flashing. The man fell before his horse had even stopped running. Ellie's breath caught. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked through the smoke. His chest heaved, his face grim, but beneath it was something else, something raw. "You all right?" he shouted over chaos. She nodded, gripping her rifle tighter. "Better with you here." For a moment, the battle blurred around them, the world reduced to that single exchange, her admission, his steady presence. Then the night tore itself apart again in fire and lead. The fight raged until the air stank of powder and sweat. Benjamin's men, though outnumbered, held the line with grit and fury. They fought for Ellie's land as if it were their own, the ranch lit by the glow of burning sage and muzzle flashes. Finally, When the Baron's riders saw their charge broken, they pulled back, retreating into the night with curses flung over their shoulders. The last gunshot cracked. Then silence fell heavy, broken only by the moan of wind across the plains and the labored breathing of tired men. Ellie lowered her rifle slowly, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Around her, Benjamin's men whooped and pounded one another on the back, their victory cry echoing across the prairie. Benjamin stood at the center, revolver hanging low, chest heaving. His shirt was torn, a streak of blood across his arm where a bullet had grazed him, but he still stood tall, immovable, unbroken. Ellie stepped to his side, her voice hoarse but steady. "You kept your word." Benjamin turned to her, his eyes dark and soft all at once. "I told you, Ellie Hayes. You weren't alone." And for the first time since her father's death, she believed it. Chapter 8. A Home for Two. The prairie was quiet again, but it was not the silence of fear. It was a hush that followed storm and gunfire, when the earth itself seemed to pause and breathe. Smoke still curled from a few blackened patches of grass, glowing faintly under the pale light of the rising moon. The cattle were restless but alive, the fences battered but standing. Ellie stood on the porch, rifle hanging slack at her side. Her body trembled, every muscle aching from the fight. Yet her eyes stayed fixed on the man who had made good on his word. Benjamin Cole. He was out in the yard among his men, their victory whoop slowly fading into tired laughter. Lanterns swung from saddle horns, lighting up dust-smeared faces streaked with sweat. But even among 100 riders, Ellie only saw him, broad shoulders squared despite the blood on his sleeve, his hat tipped low as he spoke quietly to a few of the cowboys before sending them off to tend their mounts. At last, when the others drifted toward campfires or bedrolls, Benjamin turned. His eyes found her in an instant, as though he'd known she'd be waiting. Ellie's heart gave a traitorous leap. She tried to still it as he strode across the yard, boots crunching over gravel and ash, but her breath caught all the same. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, one hand resting on the porch post, and looked up at her. "You held your own tonight," he said softly. His voice carried the grit of battle, rough and low. Ellie managed a small smile, though her throat was tight. Didn't have much choice. Not with buzzards circling. She hesitated, then added, "Couldn't have done it without you." Benjamin's gaze flicked away for a moment, down to the dust at his boots, as though he didn't know how to stand in the weight of praise. Then, slowly, he looked back up, and there was no jest in his voice. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me when I said I'd come back," he admitted, "but I meant every word." Ellie let the silence linger, broken only by the creak of the porch boards under her shifting weight and the distant cry of a night bird. Finally, she stepped closer, laying her rifle against the wall. Her hand hovered uncertainly before finding his arm, fingers brushing the fabric torn by the grazing bullet. "You bled for me," she whispered. Benjamin's mouth curved, not quite a smile, more weary softness. "Wasn't nothing. It was everything," Ellie said, her voice firm despite the catch in her chest. She met his eyes fully now, letting the words she'd been too proud to say spill free. "I've been alone so long, I forgot what it felt like to have someone stand beside me. And when you rode away, I swore I was a fool for trusting you. But you came back with 100 men, no less." His throat worked, and he lowered his gaze, almost shy beneath the brim of his hat. "All I wanted was to be a man worth your trust." Ellie's breath shivered. Slowly, she reached up, fingers brushing the dust from his cheek. His eyes closed at her touch, just for a heartbeat, before he caught her hand gently in his own, callous palm warm against her skin. "You are," she said simply. The word seemed to anchor him. He lifted his head, eyes searching hers, and in the silver wash of moonlight she saw it. The man he truly was. Not the butt of tavern jokes, not the chubby cowboy mocked behind his back, but steady as the earth beneath her boots. Benjamin leaned closer, his voice barely above the whisper of wind. "Ellie Hayes, I'll stand with you till the dust takes me." Her heart thundered at the vow, raw and unpolished, but truer than anything she'd heard. She rose on her toes, closing the space between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not rushed. It was a slow meeting of two souls who had stood at the edge of loss and found something stronger in each other. Around them, the prairie stretched endless, the night air scented with sage and smoke, the stars burning bright over the wounded land. When they parted, Benjamin kept his forehead resting against hers, his hand still holding hers firm. "You don't have to carry it all alone anymore," he murmured. Ellie smiled, tears stinging her eyes but not falling. "No," she whispered back. "I reckon I don't." From the ridge, a coyote howled, long and low, answered by another farther off. Ellie leaned against Benjamin's chest, his arms circling her with quiet certainty. For the first time in years, she felt not just safe, but home. And with the wide, eternal west spread out before them, Ellie knew her ranch, and her heart would never be alone again. The sun sank low over the plains, the sky aflame in streaks of gold and crimson. Dust hung in the air, still settling from the last of the riders departing, their silhouettes fading into the horizon. The smell of gunpowder lingered faintly, mixing with sagebrush carried on the evening wind. Ellie stood on the porch, hat in hand, her gaze sweeping across the ranch she fought to keep. Fences battered, cattle restless, but alive. Safe. Her chest ached with exhaustion and pride all at once. Benjamin approached slowly, broad shoulders hunched as if unsure he belonged. Though he'd saved it all. His boots crunched against the dirt, each step heavy until he stopped in front of her. The firelight from the house caught the dust on his face, the weary strength in his eyes. "You gave me back more than life, Ellie," he said, voice rough but steady. "You gave me something worth standing for." She swallowed hard, then reached up, brushing grit from his cheek. "And you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Someone arrived beside me. For a moment, the world went quiet. Only the creak of the porch boards, the faint strains of saloon music drifting from town, and the thrum of horses far away. Then she leaned forward, their foreheads touching, the dust-stained world falling away. "Benjamin," she whispered, "this land's ours now. If you'll have it and me." His arms wrapped around her, fierce and certain, as the last light of the sun bled into night. "Always," he breathed, and beneath the endless western sky, they kissed, sealing the promise like a brand upon the heart of the land itself.